Welcome to Disruptive Successor, a show for next generation leaders in family businesses and entrepreneurs who want to disrupt the status quo and take their existing business to a whole new level. We all know that what got us here isn't going to get us there. This show will provide inspiration, advice, and resources to help you create massive impact. This podcast is sponsored by myself, Jonathan Goldhill, and my company, the Goldhill Group, where we provide coaching for growing companies. I'm Jonathan Goldhill, and my purpose is simple: to guide entrepreneurial leaders in family businesses towards more freedom and fulfillment. I want entrepreneurs to get clarity around the changes that will make them and their businesses more successful so they can experience the same freedom I've enjoyed in my life. Our proven practices challenge business owners to think differently about their business and how they're running it, and quite literally become game changers in our clients' companies. Learn more at thegoldhillgroup.com website, where you can schedule your free strategy session. Hi, it's Jonathan Goldhill, and welcome back to another episode of the Disruptive Successor Show. In today's show, we're going to be talking about leadership, culture, how to win the war on talent, and how to scale your business, because that's always a topic that's of interest to me. My guest today is Claire Chandler, and her core belief is that leaders shape cultures and stronger cultures drive greater success. As the president and founder of Talent Boost, she specializes in aligning HR and business leaders so they can deliver strategic outcomes. Leveraging nearly 30 years of experience in people leadership, human resources, and business ownership, Claire helps leadership teams work together more effectively in less time with less cultural resistance to accelerate business growth. Claire, welcome to the show today.
Thanks, Jonathan. It's great to be here.
Let's start with just giving you a little bit of background, biographical background about yourself, how you came to be in business doing this kind of work.
Great. So thank you for having me on your show. I am a self-professed corporate survivor. So I spent the first couple of decades of my career within corporate America, most recently as a human resources executive. So I started my consulting practice going on 10 years ago now, but left corporate America 2 years prior to that, really on a quest to do something bigger that did not require me to stay within the confines or the tightly lidded box of what corporate said I could and could not do. I don't regret my years in corporate. I think they have been a wonderful foundation for me to develop my own best practices and my own worldview. And those, in fact, have helped me to really form my leadership advisory practice. And as you mentioned in the intro, I really specialize in advising primarily senior HR executives on how to align their business, their teams, their strategy, and their culture with where the business is trying to grow so that they can do that in a complementary and a collaborative and successful way.
I think that's great. I think what's going to be really interesting about our conversation today is my understanding that you've been involved in a number of mergers and acquisitions. And so I think this is really germane to growing businesses, growing family businesses at a certain size. A business needs to grow through acquisition if it wants to continue to return shareholder returns in excess of a certain hurdle. And doing that well is quite challenging because, as you probably know, the research is not very positive on M&A. And that's because oftentimes the cultures don't work. So what are some of the key drivers to making a successful merger work? I know that's something that you know pretty well and speak and write about.
Yeah, it is. And you teed that up perfectly, because the reality is the trend has certainly been that if an organization is going to grow, one of the best ways potentially to do that is through M&A, right? Through mergers and acquisitions.
Right.
But the statistics, the failure rates of M&A have proven to be extremely daunting. So I think a lot of organizations are contemplating growing through that avenue, but a lot of them also step back from that decision because they look at the failure rate. It's somewhere between 70 and 90% of all M&As fail. Now, failure is a loaded word, right? Because it doesn't necessarily mean that this acquisition is going to drive your business into the ground. But what it often means is that through that merger, through that acquisition, you're not getting the growth, the multiplier, the return on the investment that you had planned for. And so what do you do with that? And I think that is why the failure rate is so high. And as you alluded to, one of the key drivers to successful M&A, I think most organizations focus on the due diligence up front and they say, do the financials make sense? Right. Can we get that return on investment from investing this amount to bringing in this merger, this acquisition? And what they fail to focus enough attention on pre-deal and certainly immediately after the close is how do the two cultures come together? And I know a lot of people hear that word culture and they dismiss that as squishy. They dismiss that as non-substantive. They dismiss that as not really foundational to business success. But we all know that our business succeeds or fails on the strength of our people, on the 100%. Strength of the talent, on the alignment of the right people in the right roles with the right skills and the right motivation. So two of the most foundational elements of successful M&A integration are absolutely strategic alignment and cultural integration. And the companies that focus on that first and focus on that intentionally and get that right, drive their own numbers in terms of the success of their M&A up considerably.
100%. So let's talk about that because this is something I talk to clients one-on-one about. And particularly, pre-acquisition as they're looking at a potential company and trying to figure out, is their culture and our culture going to map well together? Are they going to fit into our culture? And, it's one thing you can look at core values. Does this company have core values? My clients all have pretty well established core values. And these are behaviors that they live and die by, that they hire and fire by, that they're willing to let go of a key employee who doesn't live the core values, even if they're a high performer. So how do we go about knowing the culture of the company, whether they have core values or not, whether they're living them or not? How do we actually know? We can't go around and start asking each person and interviewing, 100 employees or more and trying to figure out, are they going to fit? So do you have any success secrets there that people might look to figure out whether they're a good fit culturally?
Yeah, it is certainly challenging because you mentioned the topic of core values. Most companies by now have some set of core values that they post on their website. And you alluded to something extremely core, which is there is a difference between advertising that you have core values and actually demonstrating them and seeing them in practice. Ray Dalio does a brilliant job of talking about that in his book, Principles, when he talks about the importance of radical transparency. And he talks about the importance of people challenging each other, not to make waves, not to be contrarians, but truly to help that culture be as successful as possible. And that has to start with radical honesty about your current state. The challenge, of course, is even aside from an M&A activity, if you just have your culture and you're trying to grow, a lot of people don't know how to demonstrate that sort of radical honesty, that radical candor, that radical self-assessment. When you look at that from an M&A perspective, as you well know, a lot of times pre-close, you are very limited in your access to different people in the organization on both sides of the ledger. So your ability to pressure test whether those values live beyond the poster on the wall can be limited. In my work and in my conversations with clients, there are diagnostic tools that we incorporate into the work. There are one-on-one interviews and conversations. But again, to your point, you can't interview everyone, especially pre-close. there are things that you can do immediately after to start to engage with people and start to build that buy-in. And I would argue that is absolutely mission critical if your M&A is to take root and actually grow in the direction you intended it to grow. So it's a little bit of a long answer that doesn't have a simple fix, right? There's no easy button to say, this is going to be a plug and play acquisition, because they are such a complementary business, which, by the way, this failure rate of 70 to 90% of M&As includes businesses that seem to be complementary. I think some investors and some acquirers look at those complementary businesses and almost take their foot off the gas, and they say, this is going to be seamless, because these people are already, I've seen it in action. The company I worked for in my corporate days, the last company, recently was acquired by their biggest competitor in the market. And their play was to take that competitor essentially out of the race by integrating them into theirs. And on paper, and from the outside looking in, they were extremely similar companies, but they really weren't. The cultures had grown up very differently. It's not just a matter of, well, we have a unique combination of people and therefore worldviews and therefore personalities. It's more than that. It's the behavioral, cultural artifacts that live within each of those companies. And until you get those people together and you have radically transparent conversations about where it is we are trying to get to together, you don't know really where the cracks are that you can then focus attention on filling.
This is like a masterpiece that we're sitting here and talking about, almost like a piece of art, and trying to dissect it. And, wouldn't it be easier if there was just a culture index assessment that the two companies, most of the employees took, and we could, match them to each other and say, this is a good fit? And I'm sure you've probably seen culture fit assessments. I have, but I've never found any that I thought, wow, this is great. This universally works for everyone. And that's why I think what you're describing almost sounds like an art piece that you're having to interpret and look for and explain. That's where I think the element of bringing someone like yourself in is really important, because there's no silver bullet. There's no simple just assessment you can take. Do you agree with me on this?
I completely agree. I mentioned that I employ some diagnostics in my work, but they are not a standalone. There's no template. Let's be really radically transparent, right? I called for that among people that are acquiring companies. I want to demonstrate that as well. No diagnostic, no framework, no template is going to give you all the data that you need to know about where the connection points are strongest and where they are the most vulnerable. It's a good starting place to have some of that diagnostic. Mm-hmm. And I think that is part of the reason that so many organizations and so many executive leaders shy away from the culture integration part. And they kind of dismiss it with, oh, it's the squishy part. It's people. They're going to figure out how to get along. Sure, there's going to be a subset of dramatic, deniers and all of that. But the reality is there are ways to lean into the process. The hard work is the reality that it's not all quantitative. There is a lot of qualitative at play. But if you don't get the people involved that are part of both companies and both cultures coming together, if you don't get them involved very early on and get them aligned to your vision for the future and help them make connections between what they individually do in their roles, in their lives, in their verticals, et cetera, and help them make a tangible connection to why that matters to the bigger picture, you're going to lose them.
How
because
early on can you
to resist change?
Yeah, but how early on can you get them involved in the idea that we're looking at buying this company, and your position might shift? Some people might be fearful that they might be out of a job because you'll be combining accounting departments or HR departments or, what have you. How early on in the process can you get your own people in on this? Of course, I understand getting them aligned to your strategy and your vision and where the company is going. And we'll get to that in a moment, because that is about aligning culture and strategy with whatever you want to call it, the big, hairy, audacious goal. But how early on can you get them involved in a discussion around a merger and acquisition?
You have to start as soon after you as an organization have made the decision that that is the avenue through which you're going to grow. You can't wait until you have that first merger or acquisition target in your sights, in your deal flow, in final negotiations, because otherwise you have put yourself in a position to be reactive. You've put yourself into a position where now you have to scramble to get the messaging right. If you are truly using M&A as a strategic, intentional move to grow and scale your business, it behooves you to let your existing culture know as soon as possible why that is such an integral part of your strategy. Not the minutia of these are the types of companies we're going to go after, or here is our value creation plan, or any of that. But aspirationally, your people need to understand. So we talk about this concept of strategic alignment. You need to start building those threads of alignment with the overall strategy as soon as possible, because otherwise, if your people in your existing culture only read in a press release about the company you just purchased or the company you were about to merge with, you've lost them.
Yeah.
You have to let them in on this is the strategy for growth for the future. This is why it's important. And the more transparent you can be about that vision, the more people will understand when you do have to come back around and make some of those difficult decisions about redundancy and about not downsizing, but right sizing. People will still be emotionally affected if their job changes, if their job is eliminated, if their boss is different, if their coworkers and the mix of those coworkers changes. But they will have been brought along the journey and understood better the business case for why you have to have those conversations and why you have to make those decisions. Okay, so as early on as you decide this is an integral part of my strategy, let your people know.
Oh, great. Okay. I want to go through the good, the bad, and the ugly. I know I'm hitting you with this unexpectedly, but I would love it if you could share a story or two of maybe where a merger and acquisition went great because the culture of the organizations were aligned and the work was done, and a story, if you have one, of where it went bad and what happened. Or, and maybe you don't want to talk about a specific company where it went bad. Everyone wants to talk about how great their company merger was, but no one wants to talk about a failure. But if not a specific story on a failure, the things that make it fail.
Yeah. So I'll share a first story that comes to mind immediately, and it's more in the camp of doing certain things right. So one of my clients is about at the point of this recording, about 2.5 years into a merger. And you might be hearing that and saying 2.5 years, they should have everything figured out by now. And I'm here to tell you that those of you who think that you're going to have all the threads connected within the first 6 months of a merger or acquisition are kidding yourselves. And I think this company was no different. They brought together two entities that on the outside looking in could seem complementary because they were in the same industry. They were somewhat of competitors, but they served similar audiences and clients and customers, et cetera. So bringing them together on paper seemed like a really good, logical fit. Until post-close, they really started to open up and evaluate the cultures involved. And I see this more than I don't. I see when you bring in two entities, you have one that is more established, that is more bureaucratic, that is more structured, that if you want to put the negative spin on it, is very rigid, slow to change, slow with decision-making, a lot of consensus building, but has a lot of the best practices that have been established because they are bureaucratic and they're more established. And then you have the other entity that comes in that is very entrepreneurial, is very nimble, is very agile, doesn't have a lot of rules, doesn't have a lot of standard operating procedures, gets things done, has the fun culture versus the bureaucratic culture. And in their own right, they've been moderately successful, but they realize that by combining forces and getting aligned on the same page from a strategic perspective and a long-term vision, they can be even better. But the problem, of course, is culture. If you look at just the financials, it probably made a lot of sense that they're going to bring these two entities together. And so when I was brought in, it was really to work on more of the weaving together the cultural fabric of these two cultures, starting from the highest levels of leadership, because it has to start there. A lot of people think, well, culture kind of grows from the bottom up and it's organic. And if we empower people at the grassroots level and the boots on the ground, that's going to cement the culture. And actually the reverse is true. As you said in the intro, reading my bio, I do fundamentally believe that leaders shape culture and that culture drives success in one direction or the other, right? It will either drive your success or it will drive you off the cliff. And leaders have the biggest impact on that. They have the biggest impact on engagement. They have the biggest impact on who you bring in and how you engage them and what you orient them to achieve. And so it's really important to get them on the same page. And so I was brought in to work with some of the senior level leaders across the business to help them to get along, essentially, and help them to get aligned strategically. And what's interesting is originally they had asked me to come in to facilitate a full day workshop to build out their strategic plan. And I said, I'm happy to do that as day 2. But day 1, we have to work on building up trust. And trust is another word that your audience might hear and say, well, that's a nice to have, but that's another squishy term like culture. If you don't have trust within your culture, that's where radical transparency comes in. That's where true collaboration comes in. That's where being extremely candid and forthcoming about your current state comes in. If the people in the room, especially at the senior leadership level, do not trust each other, you're not going to be able to build a strategy that you will commit to, let alone your people. And so they committed to that. They agreed that, yes, this is the right approach. And so the first day we were working on, I didn't call it trust. We didn't do trust falls. It wasn't anything like that. It was much more practical, but I deliberately focused that first day on team dynamics and helping people to understand each other. And what was interesting is I always like to watch how people enter a room for an event like that or for an experience like that. And so these were senior level leaders coming from both cultures, the combination of which had never worked together before. And they all walked in, and as they came in, they would pick out a seat around the room. And if they talked to each other at all, it was very short. It was very brief. It was just about business. It was, oh, did you see my email about XYZ? There was no chit chat. There was no, how's your family? There was none of that. And so we got to work. And we worked through the rest of that day on team dynamics, on understanding at a deeper level what each of them brings to the table. And then as a team, how that does fit together in a more complementary way. And then gave them some real world kind of problems to solve. GE was brilliant at this sort of workout process, right? But giving them some real world problems to solve, not some sort of academic case study. Go off into a little group and read that and come back with your proposal. But let's put the elephant on the table. What is the biggest obstacle that you have right now as a business? And let's get you together in a think tank fashion to solve that. And so that was really how the day sort of progressed. By the time we ended that first day, they were laughing together. They were joking around. They were teasing each other respectfully. They weren't throwing each other under the bus. We all went out to dinner together, and they were enjoying each other's company so much, they literally were vacuuming around the table at the end of the night because nobody wanted to leave. And people ask me, what is it about what you do that you enjoy? And for me, it's moments like that. There's a moment when I walk into a room of leaders who are coming together from different cultures, who don't know each other, don't know if they like each other, and certainly don't trust each other quite yet. And there's this moment, you can almost hear the click that happens throughout the course of an experience like that, where they let go of what they had been putting in front of them as a resistance and actually say, you know what, deep down, we have more in common than we don't. And we're going to work together toward a better future, because I believe in what we're doing. I believe in why I'm here. And now I better understand that you do as well. So now let's work on building that strategy, which of course was day 2. That was a really long story, and I apologize for that, but hopefully it was illustrative.
Illustrative, gripping, interesting. I loved it. Thought it was great. So, let's talk about, let's turn this over to family businesses a little bit. A lot of our listeners are successors, next generation leaders in family businesses. And let's talk about, how does a company that's in transitional mode transition without breaking what they've already built? And I'm sure that trust and those dynamics somewhat have to play into this answer a little bit, similar to the situation of the merger.
It does. And it's interesting because I have worked with multiple family-run businesses as well. And there are unique challenges involved with that, right? A lot of the decisions get made at the Sunday dinner table, not in the boardroom, right? And it's interesting because one client in particular that I worked with a few years back, the father and the founder of this very successful business was turning over the day-to-day management to his son. And his son had been a bit of a wild child in his youth. He had resisted taking over the family business for years. He had gone off and done other things, and sort of like the prodigal son, he returned, he took over the keys from dad, and he now runs the company. And he has a very different worldview than his father. He has his MBA. He went out and did other things. His father literally built up this business from the ground up. He went to the school of hard knocks. He is the epitome of the larger than life founder who walks through the halls and is legendary in the business. And so there are two things at play there, right? The father may have some difficulty letting go, even though he is saying and has conveyed to the workforce, it's time for me to step back, if not step down, but step back and let my successor run the company, who happens to be my son. And I'm still going to be around for continuity purposes, but really go to him for everything. Well, that sort of sets up the son with a little bit of a challenge, right? Because if he doesn't actually step back and actually divert people back to the son now has the dual challenge of, how do I keep what he has built as his legacy going in the right direction? Do that while putting my own stamp on this, because if I can't create my own unique mark on this, it's not going to be worth my while. And how do I do that while still respecting dad and not sort of saying, Dad, get out of here, I got it. So there are a lot of things at play there. And in the meantime, the workforce is watching. They're watching how this handover of power and of leadership and of vision is actually going to take place. And in a family-run business, it is the same as in a merger situation. A large portion of the workforce is going to wait and see how this plays out, right? They're either going to wait to see this fail, and then they're going to go back to doing things the way that they were doing them, or they're going to wait to see if they truly want to invest their full heads, hands, and hearts into the ongoing success of the company, because maybe they were loyal to the dad and not so loyal to the son yet. And so one of the keys to that is to focus, and it's the same message for people combining entities in an M&A situation. Focus on the vision first. And what I mean by that is, you have to make sure your workforce deeply understands where it is you're trying to grow. If it is consistent with your predecessor, point that out. And if it's not, explain why. And you have to stand, one of the things I think leaders often mistake is a difference between conviction and convincing. A lot of times in that scenario, the new leader is going to step in front of the workforce and try to convince them that their vision for the future is the right one. And they would be far better served deeply believing in their vision for the future and standing in that conviction. And through that enthusiasm and through that passion and through that deep belief, convert the workforce. But focusing on the vision first is deeply important. I talk to middle managers and junior leaders and ascending specialists all the time. And one of their chief, not complaints, but the common trend when I ask them what's the biggest challenge in your role is they don't understand the bigger vision for the organization. And if I said that to the CEO and the COO and the head of HR, they would say, what are you talking about? We have it on the website. We do town halls. We have road shows. We have press releases. We have an internal newsletter. Yeah, that's great. But if you haven't taken the time, you're nodding, you see this, right? You experience this. If you don't take the time to help make a tangible connection for every single one of your employees between what they do and why that matters, between their individual role and how that contributes to the grand strategy, they're never going to go above and beyond for you. So standing in your conviction, helping them to see a compelling vision and helping them to make that connection that's personal for them are the keys to success. Whether you're a family-run business, taking over the keys from dad or mom, or you are the head of an organization that is growing through M&A.
Claire, that was profound and convincing. And because you stood in your own conviction about it. And I understand the distinction. And I've seen the convincing CEO try and sell from the stage versus speak from that conviction. And it's palpable. So thank you so much for sharing that. So tell us about your work mostly. Are you mostly working with senior HR leaders in helping them? Well, tell us about your work. What does it look like mostly? Sorry for trying to answer that question for you.
No. It's brilliant. I should have just let you go. So primarily, my main client is the chief HR executive of a large organization. I do work with other executives and teams, but primarily my sweet spot or my wheelhouse is in working with the chief people officer and by extension their team on this notion of, and this very important work of aligning what they are doing, how they are structured, how they are functioning, and how they are collaborating with the business to actually accelerate business outcomes. And it's pretty transformational, not because of the work I do, but what they are aspiring to be. Because even 10 and 20 years ago, that was not what HR was looked to provide. And businesses are now understanding that they need to have a better, deeper, more actionable partnership with HR to achieve their strategy. And there are certain companies that are answering that call and are doing some of that really, really important strategic work.
And how much of your work, if any, is involved in helping recruit talent to make sure that they have the right people in the right seats?
I don't really get involved in recruiting anymore. When I was first starting out, that was one of my core offerings, if you will. I really work more with the talent acquisition function and the full talent stack, if you will, to help them structure themselves the right way and orient themselves the right way so that they can do that very important work of bringing in the right people, branding themselves in the right way that is authentic to what the culture really is. And doing all of that. So I don't really have a hand in recruiting anymore as much as I do in helping to mold the function and the productivity, if you will, of the talent acquisition space.
Gotcha. All right. So I understand you have a new ebook out. I do. It's called Culture Effect, about the 5 drivers of successful mergers and acquisitions. Where can people grab that book?
So they can grab that at clairechandler.net/culture. It is a free download. And even your audience who are more focused on family run or even smaller businesses, I do encourage you to go and download it. You can grab it for free. I think you will find at least a few things in there that are immediately actionable.
Great. All right. So that's Claire with an E at the end of Claire, Chandler.net / once again.
Culture.
Culture. Super. Claire, it was great having you on the show today. Your words of wisdom are amazing. And I think, folks, if you are thinking about making an acquisition in your business, or you're questioning the value of culture and how it leads to business performance, then, folks like Claire can be instrumental in your learning. All right, folks, thanks so much for listening. You know the drill. If you got good value from the show, please give us a good rating on your listening podcast application of choice and share it with others, and stay tuned for future episodes of the Disruptive Successor Show.
This podcast is sponsored by myself, Jonathan Goldhill, and my company, the Goldhill Group, where we provide coaching for growing companies. I'm Jonathan Goldhill, and my purpose is simple: to guide entrepreneurial leaders in family businesses towards more freedom and fulfillment. I want entrepreneurs to get clarity around the changes that will make them and their businesses more successful, so they can experience the same freedom I've enjoyed in my life. Our proven practices challenge business owners to think differently about their business and how they're running it, and quite literally become game changers in our clients' companies. Learn more at thegoldhillgroup.com website, where you can schedule your free strategy session. Thank you for joining us on the Disruptive Successor Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, review, and share with a friend who would benefit from the message. If you're interested in picking up a copy of my book, Disruptive Successor, go to disruptivesuccessor.com.